Okay, here we go. Okay, and welcome to the Gentleman Medium Paranormal Podcast. And today's special guest is Maria Wheatley, who describes herself as an author, a Master Dowser, and a leading authority on geodetic. Is that the right pronunciation? Geodetic?
Yes.
And earth energy and ley lines. So welcome, Maria. Quite a portfolio of skills there. Don't know where to start really. And you also teach dowsing, and you do past life regression and tarot according to your sites.
That's right. I've been into dowsing most of my life because, my late father inspired me. And over those years and decades rolling by, I discovered other things like past life regression and tarot and things. So I've been in this for about sort of 30 or so years now. So it might sound a lot, but over that time period, it's not that much really.
So your father, you say your father sort of was a dowser himself. Is it in your whole family before him as well, or did it sort of start with him?
Well, my grandfather from Ireland, he was quite into speaking to the so-called little people that he said he could communicate with, from leprechauns to fairies. So whether that is an actuality or whether that was a story he told, we will never know. But he was convinced that he could commune with the unseen beings of Ireland.
Interesting. I mean, there's a big history, isn't there, in Ireland, in sort of nature elementals. I myself, I'm going back many years now. I come originally from a sort of a Wiccan background, obviously very nature orientated. I'm not a Wiccan now, by the way, but I've sort of moved into different things. But I did a lot of work with nature elements, and I've met people over the years that, same as your grandfather said, actually swear blind they can commune with elementals. So who am I to argue at the end of the day? Dowsing. I mean, for those that don't know, I know obviously a bit about it, but those that don't know, what is dowsing exactly?
Well, dowsing is quite commonly associated with finding an invisible target. For example, like underground water. That's the most commonest thing that people associate to dowsing, water divining. But you can also find other things, from oil, as Uri Geller used to do, to, unseen things of the earth, Gaia's energies like earth currents, vortexes, ley lines, and Genesis lines. There's so many different types of earth energy. So that's what dowsing can be used. But for me, dowsing is also not just about finding things, it's about interacting with the energies and interacting with that kind of spirit of Gaia. So for me, dowsing is, yes, finding things like everybody would tell you so, but also to interact with those energies. What can they do to me? Can they raise my consciousness? Can they heal me? Can they soothe and calm me and relax me? All of those things earth energies can do.
Okay, I was going to ask you, what's the Genesis line? I haven't heard that term.
The Genesis line was looked into from about the 1980s, but it was set to one side and briefly mentioned in Hamish Miller's book, The Sun and the Serpent. It was discovered by a local chap here in Marlborough called Brian. And my late father, and then later myself, discovered it. And what a Genesis line is, it's a different to, say, an earth current like Mary or Michael of Hamish Miller fame, which are earth currents that intertwine a ley line rather. A Genesis line is both male and female, that is born of a male and female vortex. So you have a vortex that's quite close to each other. They don't have to be opposite. I mean, that's too neat for nature, but they're always kind of like offset, if you see what I mean. The energy comes out of that and it flows together as one, male and female. So those are especially powerful because they can balance our own male and female energies within. So they're one of the most powerful forms of earth energy.
Okay, so as far as stick on dowsing at the moment, is this something that anyone can do? Is it a sort of trait we all have, or do you need to be taught it?
I think some people are naturally good at dowsing, and quite often that was, somebody from a village that could just find water. They were never trained in anything. They just picked up a hazel wire rod, as it's called, and could find underground water. So I think it's natural within humanity. Going back to the Neolithic and the early Bronze Age, there were well boring then, and there's only one way you can find underground water really, and that is through the ancient art of dowsing. Although nature does give us clues, okay, like where you have a rookery, you're going to have underground water. Where you have a lot of molehills, you have underground water. And where you see mist gathering in the middle of a field in winter. So they could have used water divining as well as alongside looking at nature. So, so yes, there's lots of clues that nature can give us.
I know you said there that obviously traditionally they did dowsing with a basically a Y-shaped, was it, piece of wood, wasn't it? Was it yew? Was it a yew? That was obviously the traditional way of doing it. And in more modern times, I've seen people do it with rods and pendulums, and you know, can you practically do it with anything that will give a sort of a movement, a sensitive movement, or to it just be a specific tool?
Modern day dowsers use metal rods, but that is not the traditional way. The traditional way, like I mentioned, for natural dowsers is to use a Y rod made of hazel. Now, I've always likened Y hazel, and in my own journey of being interested in Celtic mythology, as you probably are, you know, and loads of other people besides, there was one particular Celtic myth that said at the middle of the world was a well, and surrounding that well, which is underground water, there were 9 hazel trees, 7 or 9 hazel trees. And so the hazel trees were associated with the underground water in the well in the middle of the world. The hazelnuts contained wisdom that the salmon used to eat, wow. So that's associated with wisdom. So I think it was kind of in the mythology that the hazel was deemed the best. I think lots of people can douse naturally for water, but when it comes to earth energies, what people do with rods these days is the rod moves to the found or moves that way for found, and they say, oh, it's energy. But what type of energy is that? That's where a professional will be able to teach you, oh, that's grid lines, that's a ley line, that's this and that's that. So dowsing is very easy. It's interpreting that which you douse is more of the kind of tricky thing. But with a few lessons and a few skills and how to recognize an incorrect answer, it is actually quite easy. So I wouldn't say, you know, that I would say most people can water divine, and with a bit of training, most people can douse for anything.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I remember I'm 62 now. I remember my dad many years ago. My dad was a working class man, had absolutely no interest in anything spiritual or anything mystical at all. And I remember one day, I must have been about 13 or 14. He came home from work with a couple of bent welding rods. So he said, yeah, look at this, and actually showed me the old, like you just said, the crossing of the rods. Where I used to live in a little place in Ruton, there was a sunken well there, and as you walked over it, the rods just crossed seemingly by magic by themselves. And as a kid, I couldn't quite figure it out. I thought it was some sort of trick. And he said, no, I'm not touching them. They just swung around in his hand. So that was my first introduction to it, really. And I think what most people don't realise is, I know I've got friends that I've mentioned dowsing to before, and they say, oh, it's a pseudoscience. I said, well, actually, water companies use it today. I mean, Southern Water use
I myself, you know, not today, but I myself have doused leaks for Wessex Water, you know, because I did start off as a water diviner. I could find water anywhere, and only last year I found a lost holy well, although I don't do water divining so much today. I focus on, you know, Gaia's earth energies. But yes, I mean, just like your father, you know, picked up some welding rods, and as a kid, you know, my dad didn't have neat copper dowsing rods you have today. It was bent coat hangers, and off he used to go with a pair of bent coat hangers and have a really good fun day as a kid, like you experienced. So I think you don't have to have all of these fancy, you know, dowsing rods, although today I do have copper-based rods, because copper is a really good conductor of any type of energy, as we know with copper wiring in our own homes. And also it's dedicated, that metal, to the goddess of love, Aphrodite, so it kind of got a goddess feel about it, associated to the earth. So they're the main reasons why I use copper. But just like your dad or my dad gave me, come on, folks, you can douse with anything. Go and find some bend some coat hangers, and you'll find probably just as good as me.
So do you think, obviously it's an energy that's being picked up, do you think it's when people do psychometry and they hold something in their hands, they obviously can tune into, I can do psychometry, I can hold a ring and I can tune into that, I can tell people about it. Do you think dowsing uses that same sort of sense, or do you think it's entirely different? Well, I don't know, I'm just asking, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ian, and it really is the $6 million answer question. What makes the rods crafts? I mean, it really is. But that said, in the 1930s, you had the most investigation into dowsing, whether that was underground water or particular grid lines, for example. And what they noticed with their experiments was it was down to a muscle twitch that made the rod move. So if that is indeed correct, then what it's probably doing is you are detecting it with your body, but your muscles react to underground water and different geological forces. Because when we look at other types of earth energy that are found, it can be fault lines. So your body could be reacting naturally to the planet upon which it lives, literally, you know, and that's what makes the dowsing movement. I mean, that's a theory. Nobody truly knows what makes the rod move, but it's quite plausible.
Yeah, so if it is micro muscle movement, which I think is very similar to idiomotor response, isn't it? You know, it's micro muscle movements. So on that basis, obviously we are ourselves a receiver. Do you think it's possible to douse actually without using any tools? In other words, just go across the landscape with your hands and sense it if you're sensitive enough? Do you think you'll still get feedback?
Well, that's exactly how I teach dowsing, Ian. So, you know, we're definitely on the same page here, because yes, what I do is I get people to feel the energy once they've doused it with rods or a pendulum, their chosen dowsing instrument. And then I say, how does this energy make us feel? Because a lot of people, for example, with underground water, if you live above underground groundwater, that's the water that's fallen from the sky and fills up the water table and the aquifers. That can be very harmful to your health long term, and your body really does know what's good for it and what isn't. So we sense these things. So I teach dowsing with rods alongside how that energy makes us feel, so that we can identify that energy by our geosignature, as it were, in other different places besides. So I think you can use both equally as well.
As well. It sort of brings me on to my next question, in a way, which is, I know obviously the most sort of common use of dowsing that people probably know about in the mainstream is obviously water. And we mentioned like Uri Geller and oil reserves and diamonds and stuff like that. But it can also be used medically, can't it, to detect intolerances in foods and also the human body. Is that something you do, or is that something entirely separate from what you do?
I used to do that with the back flower remedies and flower essences. That's how I used to use pendulum dowsing for. I focus these days mainly on ancient sites and house clearing, for example, and house healing. But really, I try to decode how the ancients looked at a place like Stonehenge, for example, or Avebury or Egypt. I've doused Egypt and numerous countries now, actually. And I try to have a look at what types of earth energy were integrated into that site and how the ancients were using that energy. So, for example, what I mean by that is at the near center of Stonehenge, you will have what's called a geospiral energy pattern. That's the energy pattern emitted by much deeper water than aquifer water, and that's water that's born within the womb of Gaia. So it's very, very deep water that people used to call primary water, but I call that yin water now because it's of Gaia, and I feel that it gives her kind of power back, as it were. So that's one type of energy. Then we were discussing a Genesis line earlier, You can have a
Okay.
genesis line flowing down an ancient site, the axis of Karnak, for example, or along a long barrow
Mm,
like Wayland's Smithy, and that can
mm,
pulse in several places, and that can be used alongside trying to open up our own chakras, for example, or just for a healing experience. It's how, again, how
mm.
do we interact with those energies? What can our consciousness bring to it? And with my own equipment and alongside engineers and people that work with Paul Devereux on the Dragon Project, Rodney
Oh yeah,
Hale
yeah.
that's worked with me, we've tested out these places where I've
Mm,
doused the energies, for example, and they do bring our brains into that alpha mode, that
mm,
calm mode. So we know the frequency of some earth currents now, so we can say with
mm.
confidence they will make you feel soothed and calmed. And so certain areas within an ancient site will have that. Then other areas,
Mm.
for example, on the periphery, just outside of entering the ancient site, you'll have a point that's associated to an outflowing of negative ions, for example. That's like a
Okay.
vortex of negative ions. It kind of clears your energy field, is how I interpret it, before
Mm.
you enter the sanctity of the monument. So that's how I kind of look at earth energies, is how the ancients may have used them in their temple spaces and how we can interact with them today.
So, so obviously you refer to the ancients. Do you think this is a long lost knowledge that goes back hundreds of years or even thousands of years? And if it was, where did this knowledge come from? Some point somebody must have discovered it. How did they discover it? You know what I mean? What's the origin of it? do we not know that? Is that still something that's still sort of trying to being researched?
I think we do know that. And again, I can give my personal interpretation of that. When we look
Mm.
at the ancient sites, for example, on a ley line, let's just take one energy ley line, because most people are familiar with that term, okay?
Yeah.
So that means, as Alfred Watkins pointed out from the 1930s, just, ancient sites aligned along a straight line. That decrees a ley. For example. Now, on that ley, you could have a Neolithic site, for example, a Bronze Age site, an Iron Age hill
Mm.
fort, or a Christian early medieval church. So we're now, the
Mm.
time span on a ley is vast. Okay,
Yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
could add in a Masonic hall if one wanted to at the end of that, and really put
Yeah.
that timeline along like that. So if we go back to the first monuments, which are called causewayed enclosures, cursors, and long barrows, they're Neolithic monuments. Stone circles were Bronze Age, although you did have stone settings in places like Stonehenge and Avebury that are Neolithic.
Mm.
So we know that the first people that laid down on that ley system, that others followed after which, were down to the Neolithic people. The Neolithic people I discovered in ancient Britain had more elongated, long-headed skulls than what we did. So their skulls were
Okay.
kind of extended there. Quite small skulls. We've got
Okay.
quite large skulls. So they were smallish, but they were robust people. That
Mm.
said,
Mm.
you knew that through the bone density that's been left behind in long barrows. So I've made the suggestion and demonstrated through archaeology that the first people that laid down the ley system were the long-headed Neolithic, after which the round
Okay.
skull people from the beaker culture that came across from Europe around about 2500 BC at the Chalcolithic period, the turn just before the Bronze Age, then they started laying out stone circles and round barrows and their types of monuments
Mm.
on that ley system, after which the Druids came along in the Iron Age and
Mm.
laid out on
Mm.
that system. Then it was the Romano-British, then it was the Knights Templar, and so the list goes on.
Mm. So, just talking a bit about, we took some kind of the stone circles for a moment. Obviously, the two most famous ones probably in the UK are Avebury and Stonehenge. But as you know, there's many more up and down the country. There's all sorts of theories as to what they were for, everything, from marking the sunrise to doing healing to landing pads for flying saucers to, I could go on and on and on. In the sort of research you've done, and I've done my own research as well, like you probably many other people have as well, got my own theories. But what do you think they were used for? Because they were built on these ley lines. They're obviously trying to use this energy for some reason. So what do you think the sort of purpose was?
Well, you've got so many different types of energies within a stone circle. You don't, obviously you don't just have a ley line, you'll have male and female earth currents, you'll have geodetic earth energies. So it's about which part of the monument does a particular thing, rather than the whole of the monument. But if we look at the whole of the monument, there was definitely lunar alignments to the night of the high moon at Stonehenge, for example, and at Avebury-Henge. The moon's most southerly moonrise at Callanish. Then you have a lot of solar alignments in a place like Avebury-Henge. In fact, the obelisk stone at the center of the southern inner circle, its shadow targets a particular stone of the circle. If you imagine that there's the standing stone in the middle of the stone circle and it's surrounded by a circle of stones, it acts as a sundial. And at a particular time of the eightfold year, which as a Wiccan you will know, that's Samhain and Beltane and the solstices, etc. At those 8 key points of the solar year, the shadow of the obelisk stone would fall upon a particular stone. So it's a sundial in that respect. And also the different earth energies react to the sun and the moon according to their own gender. So by that I mean very deep underground water that changes its rotational spiral spin at particular lunar cycles. So they become active at that point. And again, with our measurements, we know that they are definitely quite healing energies. But some of the solar orientated, more masculine energies, geodetic or earth energies that are influenced by the sun, they tend to energize our bodies a little bit, if you see what I mean. So they can be used to recuperate above. So I think when people say to me, what's a stone circle about? I always say it's where you're in the stone circle. You know, there's so many different things going on. It's like a diamond. They can be multifaceted. Plus, a place like Avebury-Henge and Stonehenge, the American author John Burke pointed out many years ago, I think it was the 90s actually, that if you place ember seed, and that's old-fashioned wheat, prehistoric wheat seeds, ember, and you place those within a stone circle on particular mounds, and then you plant it, the seed will germinate faster and grow twice as fast and twice as straight. I've done my own experiments using earth energy patterns, geodetic earth energy patterns, because I inherited from my late father all of the surveys of the Master Dowser Guy Underwood, who was a specialist in that basically. And I've now dowsed for longer than Guy Underwood himself. And by using particular earth energies whilst avoiding some, you can increase the harvest. And the interesting statistic is, Ian, that up until the advent of the 1950s with nitrogen and, you know, all the kind of modern day chemicals that one puts on the land, prior to that, the Iron Age and late Bronze Age yield could not be beaten. So that's how good they were at growing wheat and exchanging it all over. And it's getting a bit bright. Just move that curtain slightly.
Sorry, got the sun shining through. It's a bit bright today, isn't it?
It's really shining through. I'm going to move the other.
That's all right.
That's what I mean. You could use a stone circle to increase farming yield, to heal. The list does really go on.
It's interesting you say that. I remember years ago reading about how, obviously, about the pyramids and how you could put a razor blade in a little model pyramid and it would resharpen itself. And also the same thing with seeds would germinate as well in the pyramid shape. So it's probably the same sort of, they're somehow harnessing this energy, aren't they, as a focus point. In terms, obviously, we talked about, you know, the sort of, I suppose, the positive sides of the energies. I know my own research over the years, there's been lots of stuff that I've read about and researched myself regarding, you know, certain ley lines being blocked by darker energies and certain groups, shall we say, and organisations, shall we say, that are using them for perhaps not our best interests. Have you had much experience of that at all?
Yes, because if we go to certain places, they are used by the dark and light alike, and that's a fact. You know, like it or loathe it, it's it's
Mm.
the human nature as well.
Yeah.
So yes,
Mm.
you do get places like that. I mean, a lot of people in the Avebury environs, they focus, unsung heroes in a way, they focus on clearing up these energies, because it was one of the early magicians, Dr. John Dee, as I'm sure that
Oh yeah.
we've
Yeah.
heard of,
Yeah. I know the.
very
Yeah.
famous. He was one of the first, I believe, and in my research, to have quoted ley lines, because he said in one of his writings, it gives the magician power in his word. So he's basically saying,
Did
if
he?
you're on
Okay.
one of these lays, or he mentioned earth currents as well, which weren't known in England to the 1980s.
Mm.
I mean, I remember
Mm.
dowsing with Hamish Miller and my late father. The ones, Hamish was one of the first to discover the male and female energies entwined in a lake. But there we have
Yeah.
it with Dr. John Dee. And he called them the immortal beams and the immortal rivers. You know, I mean, it's
Okay.
the same thing. And he was saying he
Yeah.
gives them both the power in their words and in their works. So we know when we're on these different types of energies, they can travel that thought to wherever that line is going. Or if it's a meandering earth current, it can veer off in another direction as well as being on the lay. So they are powerful for light work and for dark work alike.
Okay. I know you mentioned earlier about the elongated skulls. I recall, don't ask me where I read it or where I saw it, but I recall a while back there was supposedly a Star Child skull, wasn't there? Found that was elongated. Do you know about that?
No, I was
I've
the
not,
one that
I've not.
discovered that.
You
I
were. That
was
was
I
the
was the
same
one that
one. Okay.
discovered it in Stonehenge environs. The original Star
Okay. I
Child
apologise.
skull came from Mexico and was investigated by Lloyd Pye. And Lloyd Pye gave a
That's it.
really
That's the
good
guy.
description and an
Yeah.
illustration. I was in lockdown reading a lot about different burials and different places in the Stonehenge environs, and I came across an identical description to Lloyd Pye's Star Child in the Stonehenge
Ah.
environs. So I called it the Star Child of Stonehenge, because Lloyd Pye described the skull as the eyes were very much on the top of the head. I mean, I was obviously
Yeah.
down here. And that was the same description at Stonehenge. But more than that, at Stonehenge, and believe me, Ian, I have read all of the long barrow and round barrow excavation reports around Stonehenge, all of them. And there are a lot. I've done it over a long period of time. And then especially in lockdown. So I know the type of burial practices that the Neolithic, the long skull, and the round skull people did. And the round skulls only buried themselves in round barrows, and the long skull people only buried in long barrows. So that reflects the skull shape alone. But how the Star Child was buried within the Stonehenge monument area is intriguing, because normally what happened in a Neolithic burial, the body was what's called flexed, and that was put in the fetal position by tying the body up. That was common.
Okay.
Or in the Avebury environs, it was common to bury the long bones, the femur bone of the leg, alongside the skull, and occasionally a whole body flexed normally. Okay.
Yeah.
That's how they were buried. Except for this
Okay.
one burial at Stonehenge, which said that there was this strange creature in the middle surrounded by long-skulled people. And that's unprecedented. You do not have a burial in the center with people huddled around it as if their arms were being extended around this strange creature. Then I looked into the skeleton, and the report, the archaeological report of that time, said that the skeleton had a tail. They were adamant that skeleton had a tail. Now, Lloyd Pye has long been passed, sadly, but one of the doctors that worked on the project with Lloyd Pye was Dr. Ted Robinson, who I contacted because my own research said, could it have been spina bifida? That might give a tail. Could it have been a water pressure in the brain that could do something strange to the eyes? So I said, this is the report, have a look at it. And he said he ruled out all of that. He said that's not happening in this instant, and something
Wow.
unusual is occurring, but it's not spina bifida, and it isn't any water pressure extending the eye placement, as it were, or a deformity as such. And the bones were quite light as well, and that was another thing that
Okay.
was similar to the star child of Lloyd Pye. So, you know, what's happened to the bones since then? Well, just like every other interesting find, they've gone missing. So you only have
They got lost.
the report. They got lost, conveniently so. So we've only got the report to go on, but it's a very detailed report because it was an unprecedented burial.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting actually. Hopefully more will come out about it as the, as the time goes on, and maybe more discoveries. I remember several years ago, I don't know if you've heard this is have you heard of Michael Tellinger? He's a South African researcher.
I was his guide. Yeah, I was his guide for Stonehenge and Avebury.
Yeah, he did it. I attended a talk by his. Oh, it must have been about 5 years ago now, in Lewes and East Sussex. It was really interesting actually, because he was saying people tend to think of stone circles as being the UK, but there's lots of stone circles in South Africa
and worldwide, in India.
Yeah, but not many people know that, and I was quite surprised actually. And he said pretty much what you're saying about the energies and stuff like this, which I find quite interesting. It's his own research where they come together with yours. Basically, obviously you went into more detail. He was focusing more on Africa and what the circles were used for, and not so much on dowsing. But he believed they were like energy amplifiers. I don't know whether or not, they use sound in some way. It's all sorts of theories. One of the things you said as well, you said you did house clearance and healing. Now, what, for those that don't know, I do know, but for those that don't know, what is that?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, well, our homes, are very important to us, obviously. And like I mentioned briefly earlier, if you have groundwater flowing underneath your house and you have long-term exposure to that, it will lead to adverse illnesses. And that's whatever you're predisposed to. So, for example, that was thoroughly investigated by Dr. Kathy Batchelor. She investigated 11,000 houses in Austria and Germany and various European countries, and came to that conclusion. She also, after the 1950s, was discovered by Manfred Curry, the Curry grid. And the Curry grid envelopes the Earth, and it's a particular distance apart. Every 3.5 meters, you'll get a Curry grid line. And what Dr. Kathy Batchelor discovered was where your bed is at a crossing point of a grid point or above underground water, you will display symptoms of geopathic stress. And that there's particular symptoms, for example. So they're very negative to live above. So it doesn't, and also what she discovered was it doesn't matter what type of healing modality you choose. For example, it could be chemo, it could be aromatherapy, it could be acupuncture. If you go back to that geopathic stress zone, your body simply won't self-heal. Because it really affects how your body absorbs nutrients, geopathic stress. So you could be on the best organic diet, having the purest water, and if you're exposed to geopathic stress, it's very detrimental to one's health. So what I do is I decode somebody's house. I also look for positive earth energies and places in the garden and in the house. And so, because like I said earlier, some types of energies energize you, and that wouldn't be a good place to sleep or rest above. It might be a good place to work above, for example. And so I look at the whole house, and also if there's any kind of spirit activity, I kind of release that in a loving and kind way. And I communicate to the house as well from what I do a very traditional way of house healing, which communicates to the house from the esoteric center of the property. And I never move ley lines because I'm of the European Dowsing belief system that we don't need to move ley lines, because if you do, you affect an ecosystem, because there's some gnats, for example, love these type of energies, and deer will follow a different type of energy. So if you start moving earth energies and ley lines, you're interfering with a whole ecological system. So the system that I use to heal does not move anything. It just raises the frequency of that which you live above, if the earth wants to do that. So I don't go in there dictating what a house should do. I try to work with the earth energies, work with the occupants, and come to a kind of a good agreement where the house wants that and the earth wants it as well.
Okay. Do you have to actually visit the house to do that, or can you do that remotely?
It's good to be on site, to be honest. I mean, that's the best way.
Yeah.
But yes,
Yeah.
I have done remote house healing for people in Manhattan, for example, and in America and elsewhere in England. But I always feel by being there, you just get the spirit of place, you get the ambiance. You get the sometimes pick up on the history of place, you know. So
Yeah.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of things
Yeah.
going on when you're actually somewhere, which yes, you can do remotely and attune to, but there's nothing like being in the actual environment itself,
No,
in my
being
humble
there
opinion.
themselves. Yeah. And again, jumping a bit in now, obviously, two other things you said you do here is past life regression and tarot. It's a bit of a change there from Dowsing to that. So how did that come about?
I've been doing tarot ever since I was 16, because I lived down a little village lane, and there was once, you know, every now and again, these Romany gypsies used to park in a lay-by,
Yeah.
and I used to kind of be feeding my pony, and on the way back, I used to knock on the caravan door, and I noticed that they used to tell me to go away, and not that politely either. It was like, just go away. And so I was intrigued by them. So I knocked on the caravan door again. I noticed there was tarot cards. I was even more intrigued by that until I got told to go away again. But I don't know, something just kept drawing me back. And eventually the lady let me in, and she taught me tarot the Romany way, which is not reading books, because, you know, some Romanies have never really taught to read and write in that era.
No,
It's
no,
different
no.
now. I mean, that was, you know, 3 decades ago or so. So that's how I got into the tarot, was learning how the Romanis learned a story about each suit. And
Yeah.
once you knew the story, you'd know what the 10 cards meant. It was that simple.
Okay.
I teach that method today. So my persistence and probably being the most annoying 16-year-old knocking on their caravan door paid off for me in the long run, and I haven't looked back. I think tarot is a spiritual tool that can, you know, really help and guide us. I don't think it necessarily has all of the answers, but I think it can be inspirational and be that silent spiritual guide in times of interest or stress or transition. The tarot can help.
You know, I mean, it's funny, I'm very similar to you, actually. I read tarot cards. Like you, I started when I was about 16, funnily enough. I originally bought a second-hand pack of the famous Rider-Waite tarot cards at a jumble sale. And I had to hide them from my mum because she saw them. Back then, it was like, oh my God, you know, it's the devil's playthings, get them out of the house, you know, you're going to be possessed, all this sort of stuff. So I hid them under the bed. And I used to sit there I was just fascinated by funny enough, the imagery of them than anything else. And back then I read the little book and I learned it. And like many people over the years, I've read books about learning tarot, but I found for myself personally, I just do it intuitively. I know you said about the Romany way. I think that's probably intuitive, isn't it? Or just a form of intuition, but the guideline, yeah, I do it intuitively. So it kind of about the same way. And again, I know sort of people sort of, you know, some people poo tarot cards, but I do psychic reading. I'm a medium as well. But funny enough, I do more tarot readings than mediumship, and I find tarot readings uncannily accurate. I just can't figure out. I just can't figure out something. I'm amazed. I said to my wife sometimes, I can shuffle the cards sometimes 12 times, and they will still land in exactly the same way. How is that possible? How? do you know what I mean? And they literally come out identically, trying to get a message across. But how does that work? There must be something happening somewhere. There's some energy or something that's doing this. And I wonder if all this is. The reason I'm asking, I wonder if it's all linked in some way. you know, all sort of paths lead to the
Yeah.
same source.
Yeah, I think it is.
I'm not explaining that very well.
No, you explain it wonderfully, because it's good analogies. Because I really do think, you know, with tarot and with past life regression, with earth energies, with standing stones, you know, whatever, it's our soul and our higher self that kind of links us to all of this, you know. So I think it's something very deep, deep within us that can kind of invisibly connect. And whether that's invisibly connecting to a tarot deck to have a reading, and that is so reflective of what's going on in one's life, you know, it really does reflect, and you can see what's going on. And in the same way, it's like that when I take people to ancient sites, they make a kind of invisible connection on a very deep soul level to the spirit of place and the ambience of place, you know, call it what you like. And there's that beautiful coming together. So that's what I see it is. It's very deeper on the soul level, and a bit like with tarot, or with going to a place like Stonehenge or Castlereagh in the north, or Swinside, wherever. You kind of have this, sometimes for some people, they will have a download, you know, at an ancient site where their soul receives information coming down. And I think, again, it's like that in tarot card readings. You kind of get this intuition, or this download, or these feelings, or anything that can be that inspiration to give the reading.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. I mean, I had a download experience myself, funny enough, years ago. I can't remember where it was. I was on honeymoon in Cumbria with my wife. It must be about 8 years ago. And we went to see a stone circle. For life of me, I can't remember what it was called. We went to see a stone circle, and I was just I'm a very keen photographer, so I was taking photos, basically, and just getting the shots and stuff like this. And my wife wandered off, and I literally did suddenly just feel this energy, and I had this massive information literally come into my head as to about what this particular piece of stone was used for, and it was healing. Funny enough, it's a healing center. It's a healing center, and it was literally like someone talking to me, like the stones were talking to me. It reminds me of a very, I don't know how old you are. I guess I'm a lot older than you, but I'm in my 60s. But I remember many years ago, there was a BBC used to do a series of late night sort of little mini plays, horror stories and supernatural stories. And one famous one that sort of stuck in my head was called The Stone Tape. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. If you haven't, look it up. You might be able to see it on YouTube. And the premise of it was there was this stone castle where these scenes kept replaying themselves because everything that happened had been stored in these stones, a bit like a computer disk. And the tape basically was triggered by certain people who would then relive the memories of the stones. And I wonder if like stone circles and places like this work on a similar basis. They absorb things that happen, and sometimes at a certain time, for whatever reason, people just trigger it, and it almost like downloads it, a bit, you know, but like a USB stick, you know, in a simplified form.
On two levels, it is like that, and I'm 58 actually. It's just I've got a lot of light.
Oh, okay.
It's on the one level. For example, the one thing that you do get at ancient sites is a massive amount of underground water. Always, whether it's the pyramids, whether it's Stonehenge, wherever, and water has memory. Okay, so that's the premise that a homeopath would give you. So I always say that, you know, the center of stone circles are like the Akashic record of place, and it was and that stores the energy field of that which was. And I believe, as a past life regression therapist, that time isn't linear. It's the past, the present, and future all in one, so to speak.
All in one.
Which people like Dolores Cannon would talk about.
Yeah.
So you have this storage energy center with the geospiral energy. So I think on one level it's like that. But the wonderful thing about standing stones is they're rooted into the ground. They're rooted into earth energy or underground underground water. And then if people go to my website, theaveryexperience.co.uk, and look up megalithic energy, you'll find my energy experiments, which were with Rodney Hale. And that if you imagine the standing stone has 5 energy bands that wrap around it going up the stone, and 2 are below the stone. Okay, so these are energy points on the stone, and there's not that much difference between the crystal lattice structure of a standing stone to a semiconductor made in Silicon Valley. It's near enough identical, and you will get it is that's that. And so my late father, he coined a really good phrase that I really like. You got a microchip and you got a macro chip when it comes to a standing stone. They're just much bigger. So you have that. So just like with a semiconductor from Silicon Valley, it will have an energy system that excites the electrons within that system, like a computer or something, and it will excite them and release them to the surface. That's, exo electrons. You get the same happening with standing stones, with cosmic radiation that comes in from space, triggers and excites all the electrons within that find their ways into pools that can store and memorize things, just like the silicon from Silicon Valley. And a lot of the standing stones have high amounts of iron in them, which again magnetize the stone more. So yes, it can be the underground water that helps with the memory, or it can be the stone itself. And one thing that I always say to people with these energy bands, if you interact with them particular phases of the moon, you'll find that they will push you away from the stone or push you into the stone, like an invisible force as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the water. I can't remember the guy. You probably know the guy's name, the Japanese guy that did all the photos of water retaining memory. That's what I mean. As soon as you said that, I remembered about them, how it retains memory, stuff like this. So I can quite believe that. Well, it's been fantastic. Is there anything you want to add at all? I haven't covered, or you want to talk about?
Well, I'll have a little think. Well, I think as well, just to think about stone circles on a different level as well, with the underground water and working with the standing stones energy. We ourselves have a lot of water. We're over 75% water.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I take people to some stone circles that are positive and highly energetic and have healing energies, then you can heal your own body water and cleanse your body water, because I believe, and this is my kind of hypothesis, if you will, that as much as our mind holds on to our memories from the past, even past lives, you could argue, so does our body water, because water has memory. And if we're at a standing stone in a place of power, then we can start to cleanse our own body water and kind of reprogram it to have intent or for whatever purposes. So I think we can use our own body water with Gaia's very deep waters for healing purposes as well.
That's fantastic. Okay, Maria, it's been a pleasure. Now, I believe you've got 2 websites if people want to find out more about you. And they are,
yes, that's right.
esotericcollege.com is one.
Yeah.
And the other one is the averyexperience.co.uk. And all the details about you and your work are on there, and people can contact you to book any courses or learn any of the things we talked about. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. And I've got on the averyexperience.co.uk, like I said, I've got lots of articles about the long skull people interacting with megalithic energy and Stonehenge and elsewhere. So, feel free to read those.
That's lovely. It's been a pleasure. It's great. Thank you very much for that. Really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, and thank you.
You're welcome.